Hello and welcome to the show. We are Mystery Go and the Feral Monk. And first of all, we just want to extend our gratitude to you for joining us today. We appreciate that. This right here is episode number 9. Number 9? Number 9, season 1 of our podcast. And as a reminder, we wanted you to please check out some of the other installments that we've already put up via Spotify and YouTube. And be sure when you check those out to give us a like or a comment or subscribe. We really appreciate the support. Back to the subject at hand, and that would happen to be revolution. I don't know. Maybe I was thinking we could try a little exercise, Mr. Monk. Are you down with that?
Always.
Cool. So yeah, I mentioned the word revolution, and you know, immediately, your brain kind of wants to respond. Mine wants to go all over the place with that. So I wanted to see what was the first thing that kind of entered your mind.
What entered my mind? Change. Change is the first thing that entered my mind.
Right on, right on. First thing I think of when I think of revolution is it's like a violent overthrow of an oppressive government. And then at the same time, my brain likes to, try to say, well, it doesn't have to be violent, but it seems like in history, those are the revolutions and things that stick with us, the things that are largely comprised of blood and death. And of course, growing up here in the United States, I've got the history and mythology of the American Revolution to draw upon. And I'm sure that shapes a lot of my thoughts on the subject. It seems to me we're probably all shaped by that, sense of national identity of revolution from our past. And I'm sure also there could be arguments made that there's always like a revolution brewing inside our minds in the subconscious corners. Um, that spot inside our human brain that's just not satisfied with the way things are and demands change. Um, so I also think that revolution doesn't have to be external, but it could be internal. And I think that's probably where the real change exists. And so that's where the real revolution can occur. So yeah, I wanted to discuss that and hear your thoughts. Let you expound upon that some, Mr. Monk, and tie it in, perhaps with some of our other topics that this is just that thread that we're weaving.
Absolutely. I think you made some very good points about revolution, about especially inward revolution. I mean, whenever it comes down to it, it seems like that's the most necessary component. You've got societies are made up of individuals, and so if you don't get individuals to change, then you don't change societies. So if your revolution that we're kind of talking about is sort of the revolution of in the social sphere. I'm talking about revolutions in sort of our moral behaviors and our moral attitudes. Um, the inward revolution ties into the conversations we've had until now, because the type of revolution that seems the most likely to actually produce change, though probably one of the more difficult ones to actually get everyone on board with, is the changing. Um, Maybe it's not even changing, but understanding um, oneself on all levels and
Right.
in your relationships and in all of those things, and through that clarity, um, becoming incorruptible or something like that, you know because what we have seen in history is whenever a revolution has to go to violence to overthrow the oppressor of the moment, they tend quite often to become oppressors themselves afterwards, whether it's the French Revolution or whatever.
It makes me think of the question like It might be jumping ahead a little bit, but can a revolution be moral then?
Yeah, it's a interesting question. You wouldn't. I would say, like, in the general scheme of things, um, to sort of make that same to continue on the same dichotomy of a sort of external revolutions, like physical revolutions that involve fighting and sometimes fighting very violent oppression. Um, there it's hard. It's much muddier water, right?
Right.
Because you're trying to liberate or change something for the better for an oppressed group of people in the society,
Yeah.
and they're being violently oppressed, and so it may require violence to overturn that. But whether or not the revolution succeeds over the long term after the conquering or after the overthrow has much more to do with the individuals who make up that movement. And if those individuals are in the same throes of conditioning, maybe in like some very general aspects, maybe like attitudes towards violence or attitudes towards authority, they're just now they become the authority, and before the other was the authority. Situations like that. Um, yeah, it's one of our very broad, very deep, very difficult topics. But I think in the conversations that we've already had, especially about how perceptions are formed, how conditioning is formed, how um, uh, the thinking apparatus is functioning as a conditioned image with an attached story through which we're acting. Um, that's in essence covers a lot of the foundation of what an inward revolution would look like. It would be to get outside of all of those conditionings.
Right.
That would actually be the goal itself, would be to have an unconditioned mind. And how would that affect the revolution externally in the real world? Like I said, there are those exceptions. You may be like a World War II, civil rights in the U.S. or
Yeah, the
um,
Civil War. Yeah.
Civil War too. There are those moments that I don't think you can solve without violence. There are also moments that things were solved with as little violence as possible, at least anyway. And like Gandhi's perspective, he was trying to be nonviolent. Sometimes, people's emotions flared and violence happened. And the British weren't exactly known for being gentle rulers. So, but it would seem that it would affect the external revolution in the sense that an unconditioned person can't be led to do evil things in the name of good, and an
That's it.
unconditioned person can't be um, influenced or
Corrupted.
corrupted
Hmm.
or and so the just of it all is how do I get out of conditioning? Like, what does that look like? What would that kind of a revolution look like? And it would be a revolution in the sense that, part of the meaning of revolution is a dramatic change that impacts the way people live their lives and the way that they think,
Hmm.
um, no matter what kind of revolution it is. And so I think like the real meat on the bones of the situation is that is how do we get out of conditioning so that whenever we can see clearly and be able to act accordingly um, whenever the moments arise. We're not easily misled by emotion. We're not easily,
Yeah.
because at the moment, a very clever politician can come along, as we've seen over the last years, can come along with a lot of and whip up a lot of emotions and things and get an entire mass of people behind them, and then actually condoning certain actions that maybe aren't. And on both sides, both sides do that. I'm very, very what do you say, call that apolitical. um, Don't buy into the political parties. They're part of the conditioning machine, you know.
Mhm.
Uh,
It can be.
yeah. So I think, a lot of it has to do with those type of things, and like, um, maybe something like the individual has to first come to see the value in getting out of conditioning and the danger of conditioning.
Of remaining in the conditioned state.
Yeah, of remaining in the conditioned state and acting out of that conditioning through that story image, you know,
Yeah.
because that will get you, if, depending on what the inputs were into that conditioning, that will get you violence. It'll get you anger. It'll get you racism, sexism, homophobia, um, transphobia, all of the different possibilities and ways to dislike someone. But that's that conditioning. It's separating out. It's dividing things up, and the more that we like divide ourselves up, the more that we're not just human beings, the more that we add adjectives to those,
Mm.
the more we divide ourselves up through that, the more inevitable conflict is going to happen through that.
What I want to talk about and investigate a little bit more is this sense of morality, and the gray line that exists there, between what can seem to be like justified morality, um, that is kind of a universal understood thing that no one really has to question. But then there's also this imposed morality, that can exist, which, really can be a turnoff when people can get on their moral high horse, so to speak. Um, I think that is dangerous ground, and who's to determine what is morally justified, right, within a revolution's parameters is what we're talking about. But
Yeah.
who's to make those calls, and
Yeah.
that's where it's tricky.
And do we even can we even make those calls? Those types of revolutions are so dynamic and organic whenever they pop up. There's not a lot of space. It's not considerate and thoughtful and planned out. A lot of times it is reactionary. A lot of times it is um, also just necessity, and so it's hard to expect much out of it, and it's very difficult then to imagine what you would have done in their shoes with their conditioning in that circumstance, you know
Precisely.
and so judgment is a something that the mind likes to do a lot, and it's good for a lot of things, but it's not proper in that context, you know
No, it's not. And I think that's what the political and the media will play on. They do that. They play to the emotions of people's sense of morality, to align them with their values and their platforms. And I don't see that as being good.
exactly. And they'll get out in the get people out into the street and get people riled up about things and get people out to vote and people knocking on doors, and you know the and that none of that is possible for an unconditioned mind. It's just not possible. You might participate spontaneously in the moment as needed in a movement, because of its genuineness, you know
Right.
and then at that particular moment you're embodying some in some type of way those transcendent values that are outside of the conditioning. Love isn't a conditioning. you know Anger is a conditioning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's a conditioning because it has to do with what I want and what I don't want, and I'm either getting what I want or I'm not, and I'm pissed, or or I don't want something to happen and it's happening anyway, you know?
Yes.
And so these transcendent values are just present outside of the conditioning because they're somehow innate and intimate to the deepest part of ourselves. And uh and you can see that a little bit also in like how um the mind approaches like a problem like revolution, like trying to develop social change or whatever. It's going to come from that whole storehouse. Like what are the models? What models do I have for to change things? Oh, I've got for me, my models are like, like I automatically associate like Gandhi's and Martin Luther King Jr.'s and some of these great yogis of the past that I've read about, the saints in India and the Himalayas, and um, like Jesus is for me like a great revolutionary,
Yeah.
or but a lot of people don't. That's not what comes to mind for a lot of people. A lot of people come to mind like Che Guevara
Yeah. Yeah.
and um, these types of like brazen, brave hero type figures that we can romanticize and um, build a type of sentiment around.
A myth
And then that,
around.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then that sentiment and myth can then develop into a new cultural dogma that then it ends up inevitably being used to exploit the public.
Yeah.
I don't think it's always necessary intentionally. Sometimes I think it's just a matter of repercussion from the from the place in which these actions are coming. You know, they're coming from like these certain types of conditioned ideas and things, and so when the moment changes, but the conditioning doesn't, it's no longer adequate to the moment's challenge. It's another benefit of trying to understand, at least get your mind to understand the value of getting out of its conditioning.
Yep. Absolutely. Um, also think of course, the Beatles and and their song Revolution. Um,
Don't you know that you can count me out?
in um, yeah, and I love the Beatles and John Lennon. Um, recently watched a little clip on with John and Yoko and Dick Cavett, and he was talking about, someone in the crowd was asking him about violent revolution, and John cleared him up. It was from like a magazine article in Rampart or something like that. But anyway, um, John, corrected him and let him know that he was not for, violent revolution, but understood it in the context of defending oneself. Um, but he also thought that revolution occurred more like subtly through art, and I guess maybe through thought and losing your conditioning, probably. I don't think he mentioned it, but I think that's kind of what he's talking about too.
Yeah, I think that's a theme that a lot of people have picked up on like over a very, very, very long period of human history. I think it's something that that was just noticeable in human beings. It wouldn't take much to get just even a quick glimpse of like, okay, this person's behavior is conditioned by a certain set of beliefs. And I've watched them, bad things happen to them and good things happen to them. And for them, it's all been, a part of this um, philosophy or story or whatever else. Or you see like people, I mean, in the of course the last 4 years were a little bit heightened in the US, but you see like people screaming with like hysteria in their eyes and like facial expression, like yelling about like, fuck Trump's tax plan, or screw Biden's Medicare initiative or whatever, but like hysterical in their position, like like the crazy eyes. Like,
Oh yeah.
were you tripping or
Hmm.
you been doing coke all night?
Did
Like
you do some meth before you came? Yeah.
all the muscles and the sticking out of the neck,
Yeah. Yeah. Just waiting for a vein to pop.
They're whipped up. They're fully emotively wrapped up in their conditioning, and they're fighting for a cause because they're identified with that cause. You're not just attacking the Democrats, you're attacking me because I'm a Democrat. And you're not only being mean to Muslims, you're being mean to me because I'm a Muslim.
Hmm. So invested in it. Yeah. Yeah. It's hard.
And you end up with a tendency then to like corrupt your morals a little bit, turn the other, you know look away to some stuff happening within your own group, and at the same time pointing your finger and playing down the other group, like, oh, no, 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 don't look behind the
Hmm. Don't look behind the curtain.
nothing back here. But
Hmm.
that what you're doing, that's messed up what you're doing, you know
Yeah.
and all of those kinds of things are like sort of like natural byproducts. Like I don't believe it's possible to create the perfect conditioning to create the perfect human being. I don't think that's a and so why then,
Hmm.
except for in the sense that you talked about from John Lennon, unless it's like in a sense it's art. you know you've got these momentums inside your personality and stuff that are playing out from the moment that you first step out of your conditioning. It's not like you step out and it's like that forever. You step out, you suck back in, you get rolled up in some type of emotion. It triggers a whole cascade of actions inside the mind, and you're straight into the story and everything else.
Yeah. Right back.
Yeah, but you taste it, and you get to know it better and better, and you start taking moments to reflect on yourself and things. You get deeper insights into mechanisms of how you're working, how you're tying your shoelaces from one shoe to the other and tripping yourself up, how you're and you get to a point where you just see the whole mass of conditioning, and you're like, oh, this isn't I think I should just be quiet. I think and I should just be quiet. I should just, I should probably just shut up and relax for a second and like take a breath and just be a little bit more present. Uh,
Try to think about what I say before I say it.
exactly, all those kinds of things.
Slow it
Just
down.
slow it down, slow it down. And that's the big benefit to all the whether you're doing tai. I mean, there's a lot of benefits from like tai chi and yoga and all of the. Some of them are physical, some of them are mental. But a lot of times the reason that people indulge in them or get into them is because of that effect. Is because of that. It slows things down. It relaxes your mental tension for a second, which gives you a little bit of like clarity in the muddy water. And then you can be like, oh, I think I almost see my reflection. I think I almost see who I am.
Yeah.
It's just, start just trying to observe yourself dispassionately. Like that's like sort of the first step. It's like when you're interacting with people and stuff, have a little bit of internal distance, let the stuff unfold and things, see how you're reacting, and just try to watch. Don't let the voice of the judge in your mind come up and be like, oh, you did that wrong, oh, you did that right, oh, you did that wrong. And that's just ignore that voice for a little bit, and just try to observe how you're actually interacting with people. Try to observe where your thoughts wander to when they wander off during the day. Get in the habit of
Noticing things.
yeah,
Hmm.
noticing, looking
Yeah.
from inside out.
Hmm.
And that's a very good place to start. And if you're ever overwhelmed, like I said, you take the breath, and the easiest way to use the breath is basically if you need to calm yourself down, you make sure that you have very full breaths and very slow out breaths. Um, Actually, it'd probably be best just to give like the quick four basics. Now, you either have a long in breath or a long out breath, or you're holding after the in breath, or you're holding after the out breath. Those are like the four elements of all of the hundreds of yoga breathing techniques, and they have an influence on your mind and your state. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but whenever you're excited, whenever you're stressed, you breathe more shallow. And so it's like it's reflecting a lot of times your mental state. Whenever you have a great moment of release, what do? You take a deep breath. What do you do whenever something was great? You sigh, you know. So it has a really deep, like intimate tie to like our mind, and so it has an influence on it. And I think the average person breathes, oh, I can't remember what it is, upwards of like 16 breaths a minute or something like that, which is pretty shallow. And
Yeah.
so the yogic idea is, well, let's get that down to 6 breaths a minute. So let's slow that down to 6 breaths a minute, which means it's about 10 seconds for a breath. If you're doing an exercise, you're sitting down consciously breathing. And so say if you're trying to make a longer in breath, then you're doing that nice and slow. So you're maybe breathing in for 7 seconds. So you can't just suck it all in at once. You're breathing in slowly. And then whenever you get to full capacity of the lungs, you got to get it out in 3 seconds. Right. So you're kind of like you're pushing carbon dioxide out, and you're giving your lungs time to slowly absorb all the oxygen coming in. So you're oxygenating yourself, plain and simple.
Yeah.
You're oxygenating yourself and you're getting rid of your carbon dioxide, and you're helping to empty those lower lobes in your lungs that don't get emptied as easily in your normal breath. And so, okay, that's going to have what kind of effect? It's probably going to wake you up a little bit more. It's going to put a little more energy into your muscles, just like whenever you're doing a long run, at some point your breath gets rhythmic, so that the body can be efficient. And then you start burning oxygen in the muscle. You've gotten through the sugar and stuff. And if you're not good at the oxygen part of it, then you're going to end up with sore muscles, because you're going to build up lactic acid as a substitute for the oxygen. So you got like that whole cycle going on. But you're activating yourself, you're activating your muscles, you're activating a lot of um, uh, things in your body. So it's going to have a little more of like a waking effect, unless your in breaths are like yawns, then you're going to make yourself sleepy. But which is also interesting. A yawn is just the brain's need of oxygen.
Mm.
Just having to do it subconsciously because you're so shallow with your breath, you know.
Yeah.
And so if you needed to calm all that down, though, like if you're having trouble sleeping, or if you're tense, or you're stressed about something, or it's always good to put all that stuff onto the side and just focus on your breath. Do like 30 rounds of 10-second breaths, where then the in breath is only 3 seconds. So you're taking 3 seconds to fill your lungs, and then you're taking the 7 seconds to slowly let it out. And you do that rhythmically over those 10-second breaks, and you start to entrain the mind, just like you do with binaural beats, or you do with um, other types of techniques, auto-suggestive techniques, whatever.
Mm.
You're entraining the mind into a new groove, and so you're putting it into a much calmer state. It's not as agitated after that. Um, with the in breaths being held or the out breaths being held, that's where you start to delve into some more complicated stuff. It's not usually things that in the yoga traditions that you start doing right away. You get good first at like the even breath, 5-5, in our little 10-second model,
Right.
where you're just trying to make a nice even keel, good in and out rhythmic use of your lungs.
Yeah. Breathing is it's magical. You can think it touches on, you can open up or activate the parasympathetic sympathetic part of the brain.
Yeah, the nervous systems, it's got one foot in each one. You can consciously breathe. If you don't consciously breathe, it continues on its own. So it's got like one foot in each world. So you can through the breath, especially the more you explore it, the more you get like a master over it, the more you get to like things like personalities like Wim Hof,
Yeah.
that can put himself in ice for hours on end, and which is just mirroring the old yogic stories of these yogis, or like the Tibetans with the tumo meditation, drying wet cloths in the snow
Mhm.
outside, with their
Yeah.
body heat, by heat elevating their body temperature. Or there was Krishnamacharya was one of the big yoga teachers of the last couple hundred years, and he would regularly, for doctors, like, control his pulse at will, make it slow, make it fast, all while sitting there completely calm with the doctor, just jaw on the floor, like, how are you doing that? So that's an involuntary system. Where are you getting access to your involuntary nervous system? Through the breath. Yeah, that's where you're getting it from.
Yep.
That's where those pranayamic exercises are. They're giving you a gateway into parts of your nervous system you wouldn't otherwise have access to. And extreme temperatures do that, like Wim Hof does with the cold.
Yeah.
It sets off an entire cascade of hormones and things that change, your state of mind.
Yeah. It's like the shock to the system kind of effect.
Yeah, the survival modes and things start
Hmm.
kicking in. You get sharper vision, you get clearer thoughts, you get muscle ready to act. You get a lot of, like, things happen. Inflammation drops. Um, uh, Depending on the situation, like with your food and how you're eating, you can tweak that out to where you've got your cells eating up their wasted mitochondria or broken mitochondria through autophagy. And there's all kinds of ways that you can um, maximize your physical mental experience and have a, a great deal of control over it. But it's something you have to put time in, and you have to put sweat into that,
Yeah. Gotta practice.
and yeah, and you got to be consistent with it, because
Hmm.
otherwise you're just always starting back at zero, and then you think you're not getting anywhere, and you're not getting anywhere because because you're not being consistent with it. Yeah. But I would say that that's kind of a little bit the formula to start getting out of the conditioning, is like, all right, let me first take a few moments, do my 30 rounds of 10-second breaths, going to calm everything down, get myself into a comfortable position. Um, and now I'm going to consciously sit here and observe what happens whenever I just try to sit still and quiet, because your mind will rush you with insane amounts of things to do, lists, feelings, memories, emotions, um, disturbances left and right. It won't stop, and you can't make it stop. You can just watch it, and it'll run itself out. It's only feeding off of your attention, like your belief in it, and your commitment to it, and your agreement with it, and your attachment to it. And
Hmm.
you know and whenever that's taken away from it, it has a momentum that it has to run out, but it's that momentum just starts running down and running down and running down. you know
I know that also um, someone you introduced me to was, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing it, Jita Krishnamurti. And I've read some of his stuff and some of his dialogues, which are kind of like in a Q&A format. It's not the easiest to digest, but um, there's also a lot of great videos now that are up on YouTube with him talking. And I think you had a good quote um, on revolution
yeah, to
that,
wrap it up.
that was kind of pertinent. Yeah,
Yeah.
if you can
Let
locate
me
that.
pull that up real
Um,
quick.
I don't believe he's still around. He's passed away, but he's in,
Wow, 1980, around there somewhere. And I no 85. No, 85. He was still doing it. Yeah, somewhere around there, like the late 80s. He didn't make it into the 90s.
okay. He was pretty old though when he passed. I'm sure it's in his 80s, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, he might have been 90 something.
Yeah.
Uh, So I've got two quotes for you.
He's a spunky man.
Yeah,
A lot of lot of
he was very impatient.
lot of fire in Mr. Krishnamurti. Sorry. All right, go ahead, buddy.
No, he definitely had a lot of fire. He was not the most patient of teachers.
No.
But you know, it's whatever. Um, so the first quote is a quote in which he said, "Real revolution does not come merely at the superficial level, at the economic or political level. Real revolution lies in our hearts and in our minds, and it can only come when we understand the whole total process of our being from day to day in our daily relationship." One, and then I will follow it up with um, this next one, which I feel like hangs on it quite easily. Um, to change society, you must break away from it. The social pattern is set up by man. It is not independent of man, though it has a life of its own. And man is not independent of it. They are interrelated. Change within the pattern is no change at all. It is merely modification or reformation. Only by breaking away from the social pattern without building another can you help society. As long as you belong to society, you are only helping it to further deteriorate. All societies, including the most marvelously utopian, have within them the seeds of their own corruption. To change society, you must break away from it.
Yeah. Society's not good. Always makes me think of the movie Into the Wild. Uh, the character, the guy that goes about the true story of the guy that goes out into the wild.
Yeah.
But Emil Hirsch plays him, and him and Vince Vaughn are in the bar. Society. Anyway, what were you gonna say?
I was just gonna mention that, you know, like family is like a type of society, right? And like
Yes,
friendships are like a type of society, and like society can be a very positive thing in our lives where we need social interaction. You know, we need contact um, and these types of interactions and exchanges. Um, but society, in the sense that he's referring to in the quote, is definitely conditioning, or the social norms and dogmas and rules and etiquettes, and so.
moralities.
Mm.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, once again, I'd love to thank you, Mr. Monk, for joining me today.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure. And I want to thank everyone out there for hanging out with us. And make sure you continue to take care of yourselves and be kind to one another. Mystery Go out.